So now I will introduce Stanton Gill. He is an extension specialist in IPM and entomology at the University of Maryland. Stanton is also an adjunct professor with Montgomery College Landscape Technology program. He's also the CEU and CFO of a 105-acre specialty fruit farm that he runs with his family. He conducts field trials with Maryland greenhouse growers with biocontrol and low-risk pesticide use. He also works with the nursery growers too. And he is an awesome artist who makes a lot of really cool insect art that I've been lucky enough to see a few pieces when I attended the biocontrol conference that he holds in December, which he will be having that again this year in December 2021. And if anybody is interested in attending, I attended a few years ago. It was really great and very informative. So with that, Stanton, I'll let you take it away. Thanks so much again for being here with us.
Oh, I'm happy to be here. Thanks for inviting me. I'm going to share screen and bring this up. Okay, a second. Oops. There we go. So we're going to talk about biological control in greenhouses, and we're going to talk about in hydroponic operations in some high tunnels. Stacy got a hold of me a couple of weeks ago and asked if I'd do this. And I said, this winter, it seems everybody's asking for Zoom. So I go from state to state on Zoom meetings anymore. So, but this should be fun. It's a great topic to be talking about. I'm happy to see that we have a nice group of people interested in the greenhouse. I had to ask, there was one person, when I looked down the list, it was Mindy Daughtry. That name, the way you spell it, is very similar to Marjorie Daughtry, the famous pathologist up at Cornell. I don't know if you're related, but later, if you are, just send me a chat thing that you confirmed that. Stacy had asked when they put in the chat questions at the very end, if maybe you could read those to me, or someone could read them to me, and then I can just answer those when we reach the very end. And we'll try and leave enough time.
I'd be happy to do that for you. No problem.
Okay. Yeah, we'll leave enough time for questions and everything. First off, you have a wonderful staff down there at North Carolina University at Extension, and you've got people like Stacy out there that can help you. You've got a very good entomologist. So there's Steve Frank, who is also a University of Maryland graduate, came out of our program and then went down to North Carolina. So you've got some really good backup people down there. And Brian Whipker, I've worked with very closely on some writing projects that we did years ago. So good staff down there. Stacy mentioned that we hold a biological control conference. It's every 2 years. So we'll be coming up on the fall of 2021. We're figuring by then everybody has their vaccination shot, so we should be able to get everybody together. We're looking at December either 7th, 8th, or 9th. We're still trying to pin that down. And it'll be with the Maryland Greenhouse Grower and Nursery Association. We're setting that up. Good conference. You learn a lot at it. We bring in speakers from Canada, across the United States, anybody that's been working on biological control in greenhouses. So if you're interested in going to that event, that's the way to go here. Okay. So as Stacy mentioned, and this is me, I do a lot of field trials. We'll work with the different companies when they come up with new low-risk pesticides. We will evaluate them. I do a lot of cooperative work with Brian Kunkel, who's with the University of Delaware. And we will set up trials either at the University of Delaware greenhouses or at the University of Maryland greenhouse. This last year with the COVID, I had to stay out of the greenhouses. So we moved everything outdoors. This is out on my back deck. And we set up tables and field stations. And we were still able to pull off 3 or 4 trials this year, even with the COVID restrictions. But it made it very challenging on everything. So I'm not going to talk so much about the pesticides today that we're testing out, but more of the biological control that we're moving people toward. Okay, let's see. So the one I'm going to concentrate on today is aphids. As we move out of the winter time, and I don't know where you all are right now in the winter, but we just had a snowstorm last night. And we had maybe 2 or 3 inches of snow came down here, which is a major big deal in Maryland. But all of our growers are all planning out that February and March are really going to gear up, and sales are looking very, very strong so far for the market. At least they're anticipating it. And this last year was excellent after we got past the early stages of that COVID. But anyhow, one of the first pests you're going to see show up in the greenhouses or high tunnels or whatever operation you're in is going to be aphids. A lot of those species that we see are very active in the cooler part of the year, the early part of the year. When you get into that hot part of the summer, quite often aphid population drops down. Outdoors, we have quite a few predators and parasites that collapse populations when we get into the summer months outdoors. And greenhouses, you move most of the crop out. So it's really something we see in the spring and mainly the fall in a lot of these crops. There's several different species, of course, that show up in here, and we'll go over some of these major ones that you're going to have to deal with. But all of them have certain characteristics. They all reproduce parthenogenically. So that means they don't need a male to reproduce. If they were outdoors, generally something like the green peach aphid will, it's kind of interesting, as the daylight length shortens during the fall, there's things sent into the signal sent to that female, and she will start birthing out winged males and winged females. And those, it's the only time of year they'll do it, outdoors in the fall. But the purpose is so they can mate, and then the female can actually lay an egg. And on crops outdoors, a lot of times they'll lay them on weeds, and they'll overwinter because the egg is perfectly designed for temperate climates or out wintering outside. But in your greenhouse, your high tunnel, your overwintering houses, quite often they don't really produce those eggs, and they'll just overwinter as a female. We have many perennial growers up here in Maryland, and many of them are in, they put white plastic over top of a Quonset hut to overwinter those plants. I tell them when they go into the fall, they really should look closely. Plants, there'll be very small populations of females sitting down there. Now, a lot of them just ignore them. And that works in January and February up here in Maryland. As it begins to warm up, as we get into March, that single female in there will start live birthing out young. And if it's green peach aphid or melon aphid, one of these, they can put out between 5 to 7 aphids a day. So they can go from a very low population to suddenly you have an epicenter building up in that greenhouse and really take off. Now, something also to keep in mind, with the COVID, a lot of people are purchasing vegetable crops, fruit crops, that sort of thing. This last year was very popular, and I think it'll be popular again this spring. Several of the aphid species will transmit viruses, and the viruses are usually found in the vegetable crops in these transplants. So beside the feeding injury, we can get this transmission. Outdoors and the vegetable crop, very, very big deal. And some of the ornamentals. They also produce honeydew. On the aphids, they have a stylet mouth part they insert into the plant tissue. And what they're really after is the protein out of there. But what they get is a bunch of water, sugars, and the protein. It's only about 10, 11% on most plants. That's what they're trying to get. What comes in, that sugar, it's a little bit like a diabetic. They have to pass it. So they will, out of their rear end, poop out the sticky material that we call honeydew. So that's a good indicator for IPM scouts when you're scouting your greenhouse. Look for the little shiny spots on the foliage. That catches your eye. Got a little bit of sunlight out there, a little bit of glimmer. If it was out in an open area, you would actually feel the stickiness from that honeydew. Look for cast skins on aphids too when you're doing your monitoring. Once they get going, those females, as I say, are putting out 5 to 7 a day. They grow very, very quickly, and they shed their skin repeatedly. And you will see cast skins. It looks like little white flakes on the foliage. I just had an operation out of Baltimore, Maryland, that is doing hydroponic lettuce and microgreens. And they called me and they said they had whitefly. I said, it's a little bit unusual. They sent me terrible pictures with their little iPhones. And really, I couldn't tell what that was. It didn't look like whitefly. When they sent a sample in, it was aphids. What they were looking at were the cast skins of those aphids. Okay, and they're white, so people can mistake them for another insect. And then finally, not so much in the wintertime, but when we get into later in the season, you will see sooty mold if the honeydew really builds up on those plants. And being a saprophytic fungi, it's going to grow on that high sugar surface. So these are all indicators to watch for. The microgreens, I don't know if it's happening in North Carolina, but I can tell you up around the metropolitan area, Maryland, Virginia, DC, there's a lot of farm markets. With the restaurants being closed down, we're seeing a huge number of growers that are getting into these microgreen production. And for some reason, we're increasing our number of hydroponic production facilities. Some of them are doing in warehouses with LED lights. I normally wouldn't see that unless it was a cannabis crop that someone was doing, but they're doing it with these. And we're seeing it in greenhouses. And what's happening is aphids will build up on things like the lettuce plants are starting. Quite commonly, they grow on a bigger plant and they build there and they get an epicenter. And what will happen with aphids, the female, the one you see in the center of the picture there, that largest one right here, I'll put the arrow up on it, is a female. She would live birth out. These are nymphs and they stay close. This is just a little later instar nymph. They stay in this cluster like that. Well, they're wingless. Their bodies are designed to birth out. They are rather enlarged abdomen. When they produce wing forms, and they will do that, when they really build the population up heavy on a crop, it starts to produce what we call the alate form. That's A-L-A-T-E. And it's a winged form of the aphid. Still the same species of aphid, but now it allows it to fly off. And these are, again, females in the case of a greenhouse. There's no reason to have males in the greenhouse. But the female will fly off and go to another place in that greenhouse. Then it will begin to birth out. It cannot kick out that 5 to 7 that the normal female could do, the wingless ones. But the alates, they're more designed for flight. But what comes out are the nymphs that come out do not have wings. They go back, they revert back to this wingless form. Flight is very expensive in the animal world. If you fly, you have to narrow up your body. You're going to use energy to do it. These things are designed, when they birth out, they want to have something that's a rebirthing machine, basically. And it's going to be most efficient by not having wings. So the one greenhouse grower from Baltimore I was mentioning said, we went through about it being aphids. He was washing off his crop now, trying to wash them off. He thought he was washing eggs off. And I explained, there are no eggs here. The eggs are inside that female and they hatch inside of her and she bursts out a live adult. And he noticed that he was seeing more winged forms. And I said, that's not a good indication. That means they're spreading around your greenhouse and you're going to have populations pop up in other places. So be aware and look for the winged forms of these. They hold them a roof-like over the back, and the wings are usually, in most of the species, almost twice the length of the body. But if you look at it, you'll see the cornicles on there, the little things on the back coming off the abdomen that you use to tell aphids, right? These little structures here are the cornicles. And I have some better pictures. Here's the cornicle right here, cornicle there. You'll see those on the winged forms and the non-winged forms. Now, aphids, most growers I run into will just say they have aphids. And my next question is, well, which species do you have? Now, if you're talking about chemical control, probably not as important. When we're testing out the different chemicals, the species is not critical. But if you get into biological control, you do need to know which species you have. You've got people like Tracy. She's trained in entomology. She can do a good job on IDing these species with you. Steve Frank, you can get samples over to him at North Carolina State and have him look at these. I will have a grower, when they say they have aphids, I said, give me a plant. I've learned not to have them just send me a few aphids because they're usually sending a nymph. Nymphs are very difficult to identify species. You need the female, this large thing right here, this large stage. That's in this, here we go. Got the arrow right up in there. There's a nice female. So I usually want to plant and pop several of these off underneath the scope. And you're going to look for certain characteristics to ID it. And I'll show you those as we progress along here. But you're going to look in between the antenna here. Each of them have a characteristic notching quite often, or lack of notching. This thing back here is called the cauda, C-A-U-D-A. It's elongated. It's just a reduced part of the abdomen, but it looks like a tail. Some of them it's very short. Some of you, I'll show you in a minute. It's very elongated on some. And the cornicles, these things right here, these structures back here, vary in shape and color. And those are all used to ID the species. Now, I have to tell you, if I back up 20 years ago, a lot of the greenhouse growers I'd work with, when I did biological control, they'd let me do a project in a greenhouse and afterwards they'd say, so what chemical controls these? And I understand it. They want to just react when they get aphids and go spray a chemical. And when chemicals are cheap, that was convenient for them. They just stock it on the shelf. They go mix it up and spray it. It's a changed world now. A lot of the older pesticides are slowly being phased out or discouraged from being used. Some suppliers like Home Depot doesn't want crops that were treated with things like neonicotinoids, like the imidacloprid. So it really cuts down the number of pesticides you can use. The older materials were cheaper materials to buy. The pyrethroids, cheap, But look at some of these new materials that I'm testing out. Things like Syngenta has a product called Mainspring and Aceleprene. Both excellent materials. Very, very safe materials to you, the applicator, no chance of causing cancer. Very soft on the beneficials, systemic materials. This has a lot of good characteristics, but the cost is out the roof. We're talking about things that are costing $1,500, $1,600 a gallon. I've tested stuff from Bayer. Altus is a very good systemic. What it's done, it's made it so expensive to treat with the chemicals. We're getting more growers now that are willing to go in and try biological control because it's become more economically feasible. And I think you're going to see that in your state too as it progresses along here. Besides getting the aphid species identified, so go back to it. If you have a plant that's infected with aphids, you want to get a whole plant with the aphids on it and get it over to people like Stacy or Steve Frank or whoever else in the extension that is willing to ID those. After you do that, you want to look at what crop it's on. The certain species tend to develop on certain crops. Over the years, we know things like salvia. If you grow that in a greenhouse, it's almost a guarantee you're going to get aphids on that crop. And it is very popular in the greenhouse business. I tell people, if they're going to grow salvia, you want to do biocontrol, you got to plan out before. You cannot be reactionary like we did with the insecticides, where you just say it shows up, now I'm going to treat. You're going to have to go in beforehand. Fuchsias, wow, that's a big one for Mother's Day. It's like the typhoid Mary of plants. Aphids get on it, whitefly, spider mites, everything hits that plant. But it's still grown. It's very popular. Verbena, wonderful, beautiful plant. I love that plant. Extremely susceptible to aphids and whitefly and thrips. It gets all of them. Pepper plants, and everybody's growing pepper and tomato now, and lettuce. It's gotten very popular in the last year. Many people are staying home doing their gardening, and they're starting to put those vegetable gardens in the back. So a lot of things are growing are the plants that you grow in a greenhouse are going to be extremely susceptible to these aphids. So you need to watch for them. Green peach aphid, okay? That is one of the most common ones that is found in the greenhouse. It's a terrible common name, but realize these common names, the crop, it has a Latin name, of course, we use across all the different countries. Common names vary from state to state and from country to country. Someone found this on peach originally, and it was given a name green peach aphid. So, but it is very much a greenhouse crop and a high tunnel crop that you're going to see on the crops. We usually see it March through June on most of these greenhouse plants, all right? And it is just a general feeder. It will go on many, many different species of plants that you're growing in that greenhouse. Some of the aphids we have, if you went outdoors and looked at something like spirea, there's an aphid called spirea aphid. Well, that thing just tends to hit spirea. Down in North Carolina, you grow a lot of crepe myrtles. There is a aphid that's specific to crepe myrtle called the crepe myrtle aphid. So certain ones just feed on one or two crops, but these things are generalists, and those are the ones you want to watch for. And I'll show you some of the ID characteristics you want to look for. But what I mentioned earlier, you're going to look up in this head capsule is one place you're going to look. You're going to look at these cornicles. See this thing sticking out the back. Now this one you can see a little better. This is long and narrow. And then if you looked at the handle end, you'll see it's flared out like an old, in the Thanksgiving pictures, they show a pilgrim with a blunderbuss. Okay, well, it looks a little bit like a blunderbuss on the end there, and it's blackened on the very tip. Okay, so there's the characteristics that you're going to look for. And here we zoom in, we can see a little better. So here you can see the cornicles back here. See they're light color, and then here's a dark tip. Okay, so long and narrow. Okay, the cauda, this thing right here is relatively short on that thing. And then if you look right up here, in between the antennal bases, there's a little notch area here. It looks like someone took a 2x4 and just whacked it right in between the antenna and dented it in. So that's a good characteristic to know you got green peach aphid. When you're out looking at a crop, and what you want to look for this is on tip growth. The green peach aphid tends to build up on that end growth. It doesn't tend to be as much down in the plant itself. They're right up here where you can really see them. And you can see that there's a female and here's all the little nymphs. Builds up extremely quick. Okay. Unfortunately, this is out of one of our Maryland greenhouses. And here's the wing formed. This is that same aphid. This is the green peach aphid. Okay. Now you say, well, it's not green color anymore. Well, they do vary in color. Don't go by color of an aphid. It depends on what they're feeding on. Depends on determines the color. But here you can see the wings, and look, they look like they're inverted, like they're upside down, hung over the back. And this thing, you can see they're more than twice the length of the body here. They're almost 3 times the length of that body of that insect. This is a female. Its purpose is to spread it in your high tunnel, in your greenhouse, or whatever structure it's in. That's just looking for new food sources. When the females that are wingless, when they build up heavy on that crop, like that one I just showed you, on that plant, there are chemicals given off by that plant that basically tell the insect you're overcrowding yourself, and they can't continue to keep putting the population up. So they will then produce those wing forms to disseminate around your greenhouse. Now, you can put up yellow sticky cards in your greenhouse, and those are quite famous by now. Just about most greenhouse growers use those. And by the way, I have to give you a short little thing on that. The yellow sticky card actually came from Maryland. It was when I was in graduate school, there was a retired entomologist named Dr. Floyd Smith who dug through the literature and found out the Germans had done work before World War II on color attractants for different insects. And he found in the literature that yellow was highly attractive to whitefly and aphids. Okay. And so he set up trials, even though he was retired, he set them up at USDA and was using colored boards originally to attract things like winged aphids and whitefly in there. What grew out of that was our modern day little plastic cards that you can buy that have that wax coating on the outside. You pull that off and then you have a sticky card. The adult wing stage will fly and get hung on that card. And you can look for it. If you see little cornicles in there, that's a good indicator early on in your greenhouse to tell you that you got wing forms spreading in the greenhouse. So you know to look for the ones on the plant. And the ones on the plant obviously can't jump up and get on the card. So it's just going to be these wing forms. Now, if you use those yellow cards for this, use them in the early stages just to see, do you have wing forms showing up? If you start picking them up and if you go to biological control, you're probably going to take those yellow cards down because they are very attractive to your beneficials that you're going to release, which I'll show you here in a minute. Some of the wasps will actually go to those yellow cards and hang them up, and you don't want to do that. So you use it as an indicator early on. I know some people buy that big long tape, yellow tape, and put it on the edge of their greenhouses. That's fine, for pulling up winged aphids. You'd pull up fungus gnat and shorefly, that sort of thing on it. But if you start releasing beneficials, it's not a good thing because you're going to trap out your good guys. You don't want to do that. Okay. Now, the other one that is very, very common in the greenhouse is the melon aphid. And again, an unfortunate common name because it was found out on things like watermelon, cantaloupes, and that sort of thing. So they gave it the name melon aphid. But like the green peach aphid, it's a general feeder, but it looks distinctly different. If you look at that picture, you guys should be able to tell me the difference on this thing. First off, look at the cornicles back here. Okay. See them on the rear end? Oops, if I get it down here. There we go, right there. Okay. See, they're dark, the full length. Okay. Now, if you move up into the head capsule and look up there, it's not dented at all. It's actually dome shaped. All right. Look at the antenna on here. On a green peach aphid, the antenna whip way past the body here. These things, look, they're only down about 2/3 of the way down the body, the length. Much shorter antenna on these things. Now, I'll show you a couple pictures of that in a minute. And I get growers all the time bring in things, and they're different colors. Sometimes it'll be yellow or a mottled color, but they still have these cornicles in the dome head. It's still the melon aphid. It just varies in color. So again, don't go by color to identify these species of aphids. You have to look at these characteristics. And then see that cauda right here, this thing, that C-A-U-D-A, cauda. All right, there's a good term you can use tonight for dinner. You can say, hey, dear, I learned about caudas today. And they'll be so impressed. But see, that's kind of a short little nubby thing on the back of that. All right. Now, these things, when they're in a greenhouse crop, they aren't up in the tips like the green peach aphid. You're going to want to look down in that crop. If it got on something like lettuce, I was telling these hydroponic guys, you got to look in there in the leaf folds. They don't tend to be out on the edge of the leaf like the green peach aphid. They're down in there. If it's a ornamental crop, it's going to be deep in there. Once the population is out of control, you're going to find them all up and down the stems. No doubt about that. But the early detection, it's going to be deeper in there. So you're going to have to look a little more, look for those cast skins for this thing. Now, look at this thing. That's the same insect. This is a nymph right here. See, here's the cornicles. See, they're black, they're full length. They're dome shaped up here. The antenna is still only about 2/3 the length of the body. But look at the modeling color. It's a little bit like if you were out hunting for deer, you'd have a cami suit, a little bit like cami on there. So again, that coloration can vary. All right. Here's one that's called potato aphid. Okay, again, a lot of these names are given to things and common names because they were found on some field crop or some fruit-bearing crop. But I love the Latin name of it. It's Macrosiphum, and it has a very large stylet, and it's one of the biggest aphids you're going to see in the greenhouse. Okay, and it will be found usually in the spring. It's going to be April, May that you can find on crops, and it's a general feeder. Now, look at this. This is what I said earlier. See that nymph? That doesn't look very much like this thing, does it? Don't get this to Stacy or to Steve Frank or whoever else you're getting it to. You want these things. We need to have mature females. Now, see that striping running down the back? Okay. That's one of the big characteristics. And the other thing is it's a big aphid. And just the size. Don't go by the color because sometimes they are that kind of pinkish orange color. But look at the cauda back here. See, that comes more to like a deltoid, like a point. Now, that was quite a bit different from that melon aphid and the green peach aphid. Okay. And look at the cornicles. They're darker, they're down from the tip. So the green peach aphid would only be this tip part, but this goes down a fair amount. And it's actually not light color like the green peach aphid. So those are things that we look for. Foxglove aphid. Yep. Yeah. Foxglove aphid is another one that's getting more and more common. In our Maryland greenhouses, we have it crop up periodically. For some reason, up in New York State, they said this has become the most common aphid, more than green peach aphid, melon aphid in greenhouses. So that probably won't impact you guys because I don't think you ship from north down south. Usually it comes from south going north. But watch for this one. This is pretty easy to tell. It looks a lot like a green peach aphid because it's got the long cornicles and the black tip like that. But look at this. See that dark green spot right at the base of the cornicle? All right. That's what makes it different. You can see it here a little better. Here you can see that darker green color. Okay. But if you looked at it first, you'd say, that kind of looks like green peach aphid. But if you see it darker down there, no, that's the foxglove aphid. Okay. Now, again, why am I making a big deal about this? Because biological control makes a difference on what's parasite or predator, or more of the parasites that you're going to use. The predators are generalists, so not as critical on that. If you've got stock plants, and many people aren't doing stock plants anymore. I mean, what's happened in the greenhouse industry over the last 25 years, everything's gone to either Costa Rica, Guatemala, southern part of Africa. The plants are grown there because they've got a warm climate. They can maintain stock plants. They take cuttings off things. They root a cutting usually, and then you go to your supplier, you buy the plants, and it's shipped up to you. All right. And so it's become cheaper to ship all that stuff in, and then you just plant it out. So they're maintaining the stock plants. But a lot of our American companies, like Ball International is one of the big ones. One of the German ones is Duman. They have greenhouses in all these different countries. So they grow these crops. And when I talk to them, I tell them, you need to do biocontrol down there on your stock plants, okay, and get it under control. If you are growing stock plants in your place, then start there. That's a good place to do it. And any of the biological control you're going to do on aphids, think it out during January, February. There's a list of crops I mentioned. Look at what you know get aphids. I'm not sure if North Carolina has a manual, but we have a 400-page manual I put out that's called Greenhouse Management with IPM Emphasis. And it goes through and we list all the different controls for material, biological and chemical. But we also made a list based on Maryland greenhouse growers, what crops they saw things like aphid or whitefly or spider mites. So you can look down the list and create your own list out of that. If you want to get a copy of that, you can get it. We have it. You can download it as a PDF through the University of Maryland. If you go to IPM Net, we'll have it there, or you can have a mailed copy if you like to have a printed type thing. I came from the old school, so I like to keep printed copies around to look at stuff, not just look at the computer all the time. Okay, so aphid control, the biological, what's the possibilities? If you're talking about green peach aphid and melon aphid, Aphidius colmani is the best one I can suggest to you. This little wasp, and some people call it a stingless wasp. I hate to use a name like that, but what they're trying to do is if they tell their customer they're using a wasp, they go, oh my gosh, I get stung. This thing will not sting a human, but it's very small. If you put this on a dime, it would be about half the length of a dime, or the diameter of a dime. Okay, so small little creatures. Now, the cool thing with the web is you can search up a name like this and you can find all these different suppliers for it. And there's a lot of biological suppliers out there at this point. Most of the major chemical companies have got in, besides selling chemicals, they're selling biological organisms under some division. One of the famous ones is Koppert Company, Koppert. They're based out of the Netherlands. I spent some time with them when I went on sabbatical back in the 1990s, and they were the leader of biological control. But there's many other companies out there, BioBest, IPM Labs. If you do a web search, you'll find a lot of these places out there. They will supply these little parasitic wasps, and you can release them in your greenhouse. Most of them, you need to get your order down. You can't say, hey, I want it for right now. You have to plan ahead. And excuse me, I'm at my house, and so yeah. I'll wait 1 second for this to stop. I'm sorry, I can't stop it. Okay, sorry for that interruption. My wife works from home here too with the feds, and so she has to have the phone open, so I have to leave that on. Sorry about that. All right, so anyhow, you can purchase these. What you want to do is when you put your order in, they're going to ship them usually on a Monday, and they send them overnight express. When you get those, you need to plan on doing your release basically right away. If you need to hold them, then you can put them in a refrigerator and hold them for a couple of days. You want to, that refrigerator is running at 40 degrees Fahrenheit. Don't put them in the freezer, obviously, but refrigerator, you can slow them down and then try and do a release as soon as possible. If the longer you wait, they are a living organism, then the mortality will go up on those and you'll lose some of your biological control. Now, if you had potato aphid or you had that foxglove aphid, then I would suggest using Aphidius urvi. Now, they look very similar. You know, the one's a side view, obviously, and the other one's a dorsal view looking down on it. But very similar in shape and size, but they are different. And they're specialist. The first one, the colmani, excellent on green peach aphid, melon aphid. We've done a lot of control projects with greenhouses up here in Maryland. Very good success on those. Doesn't work as well in those other species of aphids. The urvi is a little wider spectrum, and so that's why you need to know the difference. When you get these wasps, generally they're shipped as a pupa. Okay, so they go from that larval stage where they're raised at the biological supply house, and they will ship to the pupal case. And what you would do is you want to disperse those out among your crop. Okay, now you can just put them out by hand if it's a small greenhouse. Larger greenhouses now are usually taking little blowers, and they'll modify them. You can get these little handheld blowers with a battery pack on it, and you can make your own. You can just put them in a bottle, and you can screw a little port on there, and it just feeds it in and blows it out on there. If you look at some of the suppliers for biologicals, they'll actually sell you a blower. But if you look at it, it's basically like a Makita or something else that they've modified, into a thing. So you can decide if you can either make one yourself. Most greenhouse growers are pretty handy. I get a lot of our Maryland growers that build them out of their own equipment. But if not, you can buy them. Okay. But the release on that is between 1 to 3 pupa per square foot of growing area. Okay, to give you a range on that. The another one you can use on the green peach aphid and potato aphid is Aphidius matriciae, and it's very efficient. We haven't used this one as commonly. More if we had the potato aphid, we'd go to that. We tend to go to the colmeni as the common one on there. But what they will do is the female wasp is the one that's going to do the work out of this. They do produce male and female. But the female, after she's made it, will go over to the aphid. She will use her ovipositor to sting it and lay an egg inside, and then that larvae develops inside there. So here's a healthy aphid. There's a healthy aphid. Well, that could be one that's going there. There's a cast skin, by the way, of an aphid. See that thing right there, the white? Now, this is one that has a parasite inside of it. This has colmeni in there. Okay, this is a melon aphid. You can see those black cornicles sticking out of the end there. Can't see the antenna or the head caps anymore. But they swell out and they look like popcorn kernels. Okay, and this one's infected right here. The wasps tend to go to these late, they don't usually go to the nymphs. They go to this later instar and they sting it and lay their eggs in there. And basically this thing is a walking dead now. The larvae is developing in there, feeding on it, and puffs it out. Okay, and then what's going to happen is that larvae that's inside will develop and reach its later instar. It has to exit out of there. So it's going to use its mouth parts. It has little mandible mouth parts that it can cut a little hatch out of the back of that aphid that'll exit. And so you'll see this sort of thing. Okay, so that rounded hole. It looks like something you might see on a ship, where a round porthole. Now, some people release ladybird beetle in the greenhouse, which isn't as efficient. That's a predator. This is a parasite you use in there. But if you had them and they were feeding on this, what they would do is the hole looks different. They chew through here, and so you get this big torn up area if you had action that was coming off those ladybird beetle larvae. But if it's a round hole, that came off the Aphidius colmeni or the ervi or one of the others. Okay, one of these small wasps. Now, the wasps themselves are not overly expensive. What is expensive is the shipping. And if you looked with the COVID, shipping's going out the roof here. You see Amazon trucks everywhere. You see UPS. You see FedEx. They're going everywhere all the time, late at night. I've ordered things online too, and I noticed some people cover the shipping cost when you buy things, but a lot of them are starting to charge. And I noticed the fees are going up. And the same thing's going to be true of this. This stuff's sent to you overnight express. So greenhouse growers, being generally thrifty types, that want to, bottom line, you want to make money and you don't want to be too expensive on this. The best thing to do that is to use banker plants. Okay. And for aphids, what we've done is taken barley and oat seeds, which you can go to a farm supply store and buy a big old bag of that. One thing is, when you got that, put it in a trash can afterwards that you put a lid on, because mice will find it and they'll end up tearing through that pretty quick. But you take the seed, and then we tell growers, take a pot and put the seed on there and get this growing. Okay. And this is your banker plant. And what you're going to do is, I'm going to show you here in a minute, you're going to stick an aphid on there that you build up the population. All right. And then you can release your parasites on there, and you get the parasite reproducing on these guys. And then the wasps fly off that and they go over onto these crops and they start parasitizing any aphids that show on here. Now, it sounds counterintuitive to stick an aphid on here, but I'm going to show you, it's a special aphid you're using. You can buy them from biological supply houses. It's worthwhile to buy it the first time when you're getting your shipment, and then grow your own after that is what it gets down to. So you avoid the shipping cost. What we've worked with several greenhouse growers, and we tell them you need to be a little bit handy and building a little chamber. And this is one that the greenhouse built over in Howard County. They just took 2x4s. They didn't use pressure treated, they just used regular wood, and built a frame. And then they put screening, a little micro screening on here, fine mesh. And then they put Velcro right along here. Okay. And they have a door they can stick on, and it closes that all up. They will start we tell them the oats and the barley, doesn't make a difference which one you use, because the aphid feeds on this monocot. we tell them stick the plants in here and then close that door up. Okay, you want to grow plants in there, and about every 2 weeks, take additional pots and grow more of that and stick them in there each time. What you're trying to do is, if that's in the same greenhouse where you're releasing the beneficials, they'll knock your population down of the aphids you introduce. You don't want that. You want the aphids to actually grow on those, build up, and then you're going to pull them out at different times and put them on the bench. Okay, so you keep it going, so you don't have to order more of these aphids. Okay, now the banker plants, how many to put out in the greenhouse? Between 1 to 4 per 10,000 square foot of greenhouse. So you don't need that many banker plants out there. All right. BioBest suggests to use, and that's one of the suppliers there, suggests you use a rate of 1 plant per acre. And that's going pretty far. All right. It's okay to have a couple extra plants in there. All right. Now, what you're going to use is something called the bird cherry oat aphid or cereal aphid. Okay. And it only feeds on monocots. So it's only going to feed on that barley and wheat. It's not going to feed on your broadleaf things, not on your tomatoes, not on your peppers, or anything else. So this aphid is specific. Remember what I said in the beginning? Certain ones feed on certain crops and they don't cross over. That's true of this. Now, if you're growing ornamental grasses or lilies, don't do this because that aphid will spread from those banker plants onto those. But if you're growing anything else, you're good to go. Okay. Here's the plants right here, and they're going to mature. What's going to happen is these plants are going to outgrow that pot because they're really designed to be out in the ground. But you got your aphids you put all over here. It lets your parasites build up there. You're always going to have to replace this. About every month, figure you're going to pull these old plants out here and stick some new replacement ones out and let the parasites go nuts on you. The aphid that you're going to buy from the biological supply house is called that bird cherry oat aphid for use in a banker plant. All right. And once you got those established, you're going to begin the season. If you can keep your plants going and you have that little chamber where you can keep plants, just let aphids build up and not have the parasitoids knock them down, you can continue to produce plants for yourself basically the whole season. Here's what a bird cherry oat aphid looks like. So they got very short little cornicles to them. Again, don't go by the color because that does vary quite a bit. The antennae are relatively short, about half the length of the body. And no real distincting thing up here. The cauda is very, very short on these things, okay? But they're going to feed just on the monocots, not on the dicots, all right? So, again, get your barley seed or your oat seed, put them in the 6 to 8 inch pots. One thing we found, that grower I was showing was on the bench, is when they put that on there with the aphids produce honeydew. We talked about that in the beginning part. The honeydew attracted ants in there on her bench. The ants, they're not going to damage plants, but they moved up on the plants and they actually are protecting the aphids. When you release a parasitoid, the ants are very voracious fighters. They got big mandibles. They will chase off the beneficial organism that you released. So we ended up having her put Vaseline around the edge of the pot. Each time she'd pull them out of their little chamber, she just put Vaseline on the edge, and that made a barrier that the ants couldn't get up to the plant and defend those little bird cherry oat aphids, because we do want them to get parasitized, and then we want those adults to fly over the other part of your crop and go hit it. Okay, so a very cool little system. I've written up some little fact sheets on using these, and we have them in that manual I mentioned for the greenhouse IPM manual. It talks about this. Now, the other thing you can use a predator. Now, those are parasites we're just talking about there. They're inside the insect. These things feed on the outside, and it's called Aphidoletes aphidomyza, and it's a type of predatory gall midge. It's about the same size as those other ones. Looks a little bit different. But what it will do is it will search out aphids in your crop. And when they find it, the female goes down and lays her egg right next to it. And this is the larvae right here. If you see the slug-like larvae, you look at that thing and think, gosh, that couldn't possibly catch an aphid. Well, realize aphids are basically like cows out in the field. Once they're settled down, they're going to put their stylet north part into that leaf, extract juices, and they stay put. They really don't move and run around. So this thing will move over to that aphid population, and it will take its mouth part and it sticks it into the leg, believe it or not. And it puts a toxin there that paralyzes the aphid. It can't move away. Then it will jam its stylet right up into the abdomen of the insect and suck out the juices. So they gut the insect out. They're very effective, but you need to recognize them. They're kind of this orangish color, yellow orange. So if you release these and you see this on the foliage, and I'll get growers afterwards bring in, they say something's damaging the plant. And I said, no, those are the good guys you released. All right, that's what you want. The adult they can recognize, but this thing, that's the stage they want. It's a young, hungry larvae that's going to go after the aphids. Very, very effective on killing aphids. And you can do a combination of both of them. You can do the Aphid colmani and the Aphidoletes would work. One's a predator, one's the other one's inside the insect. But take those yellow sticky cards down when you're doing this, because that will attract them over there. All right. Now, a lot of times when people get the plugs in, up here in Maryland, we have a lot of the big greenhouses that have a machine that goes over there and mechanically takes it out and then takes it from the plug tray and puts it into a 3.5 or 4 inch pot, and then that tray is moved out. We tell the growers that's a good time on the aphid susceptible plants like the peppers, the tomatoes, the salvias, the verbena, actually to put a little pile of these Aphidoletes. The pupa is what you're going to be sent, and just put them right on top of the soil. After that goes through the machine and it's potted it up, just have them sprinkle it out on that flat and move those into the greenhouse. All right. And those will create little hot spots or epicenters of the parasite, and they're going to fly around your greenhouse, and they're going to go looking for those aphids. Does a great job. I think the combination of the two is probably the way to go. All right. Now, you can use entomopathogenic fungi, but the thing is, you wouldn't want to do these predator or parasite releases. I'd pick that and say, go with that. That's a good way to go. You can have a backup material, something like the entomopathic fungi. Bavaria bassiana is the Latin name of it. It's sold under the name Botanigard or Botany Guard, whichever way you prefer to pronounce that. And that's sold by Bioworks out of New York. Mycotrol is sold by Certus Company, and it's just another formulation of this Bavaria bassiana. What you've got with that, if you look over in the corner here, you'll see the little spores. Okay, and so you're taking a fungi spore. It's not a plant parasite, but an insect parasite. You're taking these little conidia, mixing them with water. They put a surfactant in there, and you spray that with a fine mist onto the aphids. And if it germinates on them, just like putting seed on top of a substrate, you'll see these little fruiting bodies begin to grow out of there. What happens? They produce a hyphal body that grows inside here and guts out the insect. All right. Now you have to make contact with the aphid. Some of the aphids it works better than others. The melon aphid, we can get pretty good control. Green peach aphid tend to have longer legs, and unless you directly hit it right on their body, if it's just sitting on the foliage, we've actually photographed them. With their long legs, they'll walk over the spores and they don't even contact them. But if it hits their body directly, it'll get them. It's just making that contact is a key thing. Now, Bavaria bassiana, I've worked with this for many years, since the 1990s, and it's gone through a couple different companies at this point. But now Bioworks out of New York has the best formulation of it, I know. And then Mycotrol, they've got different formulations on there. Some of the people that are organic users have to use a formulation that's a wettable powder formulation. You can't use the typical Botanigard because that has an EC formulation, and that would not fit on organic. So if you're organic, you need to look at that and make sure you got the one that's labeled for organic. Okay. So this is just talking about the Botanigard and the Myco. Another material to use is azadirachtin. Okay, azadirachtin is made from neem seed. You've all heard neem over the years. That's a plant normally grown in India. They've tried to grow it down the islands, down parts of Florida. Hurricanes keep taking it out, unfortunately. They take the kernel and they grind it up, and there's oils they pull off that. And they can make a clarified oil. It's called neem oil. That's one thing. And then they can take the individual chemicals. There's 16 or 17 different actual chemicals in that neem seed. And this azadirachtin that they extract out of there can be formulated and then sprayed on immature stages of aphids. It's not going to get the adult. It's not going to do anything to them. But if it gets the nymphs, what it does is acts as an insect growth regulator. It prevents them from shedding their skin, going to the next instar, and developing. Okay, so it works very nicely. Now, that greenhouse grower I just mentioned to you in Baltimore that came to me, and he has a kind of out of control situation. He didn't have a sprayer, it turns out. So he needs to get a sprayer with a fine mist and really get in that foliage with azadirachtin. But I talked to Mike Demick, who's with Certis Company in Columbia, Maryland, and they're a pesticide company. They were saying that it would mix in another material, something called Entrust, okay? And it's a spinosad material, okay? And you can go in there and that kills the adult and then do that combination. He was saying combine the Entrust and the azadirachtin, their product, together. You get the nymphs and you get the adults, all right? The azadirachtin, it's taken up systemically, believe it or not, on a lot of plants, and it has some translaminar action. And that means if you spray it on foliage, it goes from the top down to the bottom. But it takes 2 to 3 weeks before you're really going to prevent a population or reduce the population, because it's taking out the nymphs. So it's not fast acting. That's why we're saying probably to mix in that Entrust in there if you're going to do that. Azadirachtin is relatively soft on the beneficials, okay? And so if the beneficials weren't doing it for you, or you had a population get out of control, I'd probably come in with these, knock them down, then bring the beneficials in there, okay? Bioworks also sells a product called Molt-X that you can get. Here's that Certis company. They're based out of Columbia, Maryland. And they sell biopesticides. Do a web search on them. You'll come up with their different products in there. OHP has some different products they've got under this azadirachtin. So I would go with these main ones. If you go on the web, you're going to find other places selling azadirachtin from all sorts of, everything's going around the world. I can't guarantee the quality control on some of the other products. These companies I've dealt with and tested out their products, quality control is very good and is very effective, okay? Now, there is one that also mixes a premix of azadirachtin with a natural pyrethroid, but you wouldn't use those beneficials in there if you're doing that, because that would take them down also. Okay, that's more trying to knock a population down. Now, the other thing is I asked Michael Brownbridge, who's used to be with the Ontario Experiment Station and is now with Bioworks up in New York. He's a very good entomologist, done a lot of work. And I asked him to give some input on this. And he said, the other thing you can do on aphids, you can use a general predator like lacewings. And those are relatively inexpensive. A lacewing, you can buy the either the larvae or you can buy the pupa and release them in the crop. They're basically psychos. They kill anything they see. They'll kill their brother and sister if they see them. But you let them loose on aphids and they can really knock it down. And he pointed out to me, in Canada, they're doing quite a bit of work with the cannabis crop, where it's both recreational and medical up there. But we have quite a few hemp growers down here in Maryland. And so we're looking at using this. And they've been cheaper and very effective way of taking out the aphid population. Okay. So this is some of the suggestions he had on here about controls on there. And he was just saying the problem on the aphid, I asked him to comment on the lettuce crop. The problem is in those inner leaves, if you're spraying something, to get the spray in there is the difficulty on that. Okay. So old chemicals for aphids and whiteflies and vegetable transplants. I mean, things like metocloprid are still out there. Marathon 2 are labeled. It's just that we're finding more of our growers are getting resistance from the big box stores and from the garden centers. The people are concerned about the neonicotinoids, but very safe around humans, but they can have impact on some of the beneficials. Now, on most ornamental crops, most of those things are not heavy pollen producers, so you wouldn't really have pollinators hitting most of those things. But probably, I don't know, just move away from it. The insecticidal soaps are always a possibility. They're relatively cheap. You just have to be careful and not make more than 2 or 3 applications, because it tends to cause phytotoxicity. And then the azadirachtin I just talked about. Okay. Now, I'm going to finish up with this one, and then we'll be close to finish here. There was some reports I just got from IPM Lab out of New York, and they are starting to do a system where they use this Aphidius urvi, the one I mentioned earlier, for foxglove and potato aphids. And they're also going after pea aphids. Or actually, they put a pea aphid on a fava bean. Okay, so the pea aphid is mainly on these pea-like or the legumes. It won't hit other crops. So they build it up on the fava bean, and they're using them as a banker plant, just like we talked about that barley. And here's the little wasp. You can see it. Here's the female sticking it right into that female and lay an egg in there, and then that larvae will develop in there. And you can see another one right there. It's cool shots. Okay. So potato and foxglove aphids have been growing as a problem in the springtime in our ornamentals. And again, there's that potato aphid we saw earlier. Here's the foxglove aphid. Remember those little circles on here? Okay. All right. And so here's what they're doing. They're taking fava beans and putting them in pots, just like you do with those barley and oat plants, and they make them a banker plant. And they will put that pea aphid on here, and then release those wasps and let them build up on there. And those will then fly off here and go hit your other crops and take it down. All right. This picture, I should point out, was from Karen from IPM Labs. So I had to give her credit for that nice picture she sent me. And they're using one of these per 1,000 square foot. Okay. And these numbers are never absolute. I mean, you had more, that's fine. But, to give you a minimum number. Fava bean, if you haven't seen that before, this is what the plant looks like. It grows pretty aggressively. And so I'd put a fair sized pot there, at least a gallon pot you're going to grow it in. You're going to get it up into flower, and it will produce the crop. You don't have to make it flower in here. The pea aphid will just do fine on the foliage. And then you're releasing that Aphidius urvi to build up on those and then come off that crop. And here's what it looked like. It actually got the bean on there, and people eat fava beans. So the banker plants, here's the fava beans. Here is the using the bird cherry oat aphid on the barley plants. So both of them work. Here's a young fava bean. The one thing they're finding is fava beans do fill that pot pretty quick. You've got about probably 5 or 6 weeks you can grow it if you have a 1 gallon pot. And just like those other ones, you want to have new plants you're starting, either have them in another greenhouse or if they're in that same greenhouse, some sort of chamber that you can keep the parasitoid off there, because you want to build the aphid up on the plant, on the fava bean, okay? All right. I think I've reached just about the end of my time. And if you need to get a hold of me by email, it's very easy. People at the university, it's our first initial, last name, which over the short names. So it's sgill@umd.edu. And I'm going to see if Tracy has any chat questions that she wants to ask, or any of the participants want to ask.
We did have one question, but before we do that, there is somebody on here who his name is just showing up as iPhone. He has a hat and a hoodie over his head. If you could let us know what your full name is, because we can't give you credit if we don't know what your name is. So that's the only person I think that we were struggling to figure out what their name was. So if you can just go ahead and put that in the chat.
Stacy, we also have someone named Bud Kaz iPad that we need to know who that person is also.
And while we're waiting for those to come in, the question was, Stanton, how about oleander aphids on milkweed? What would be a good, good natural enemy or control option for those guys?
Yeah, and that's an excellent question. We have quite a few perennial growers up here, and one of the owners of one of the large companies called me this fall, and he said their garden centers they were selling to, people were buying milkweed to put out in landscapes because they want to encourage the monarch butterflies. And unfortunately, to make the plant look good, the oleander aphid gets on there and other insects feed. They were treating with insecticides. And when it went to the garden center and then sold to the end user, the customers are coming back saying the caterpillars are dying. They want to know what insecticides they're using. So it got back to, he said, how am I supposed to make this plant look good when, without using the insecticides? And they said, well, we have to dig in and do some biological control. The lacewing is what I suggested to them for immediate effect. They're the Psycho of the world. They're relatively inexpensive. You can get them in different forms. They can come in a pupa, you can actually get them on looks like a black tape that looks almost like sandpaper that they glue all the eggs on there, and you just break them off a perforated edge and you spread it out among the crop. We had them try that this fall, and it appeared to work fairly well. The Aphidius urvi, I told him we could do that in there. Now, the problem is with a perennial grower, he's got ornamental grasses he's growing and lilies. And what I was saying earlier, that kind of limits you. So we'll probably stay with things like the lacewing in the case of that. But if you didn't have those crops you're growing, then you could do the Aphidius urvi on the banker plants with bird cherry ode aphid to make that work.
Great.
Yeah, nice picture of the lacewing larvae. Yep. And there it is, chowing down on an aphid. Very good. Thanks, Tracy, for bringing that up.
And we have all the other forms here too, the adult, the egg, and the pupa. I love the story of the egg here because these guys are so ravenous, guys and gals. They'll eat anything that they see. So the eggs are laid on this funny little hair so that the first one who hatches can't go through and eat all of its brothers and sisters. So it's actually one of my favorite natural enemies.
Yep.
Because they just have such a funny story. Okay, so we had a few other questions here. Do you have to continue getting more aphids for the banker plants in order to keep the colonies going?
No, and that's what I was saying. The whole objective behind the banker plants is you buy them one time. And if you do a good job of keeping your plants every couple of weeks, you start new ones and you keep the parasites off them. That's where you need that little chamber thing, because they're going to fly out of that original greenhouse. They'll go out to the vents and they're going to show up in the other greenhouses. You need some sort of area that you're keeping everything out of there. But the idea is to keep them going the whole season. The first time I saw this was back in 1994, 95. I did a talk in Maine, and a grower was presenting about this, and he talked about a banker plant. And at his end of his talk, everybody lined up and they took sprigs of these aphids back to their greenhouse to get their own population going to the aphids. Yeah, but the object is, no, buy them one time from a supplier and then grow your own. You're trying to keep the cost down is what the idea is on this.
Great. And then the next question was, any biological controls for the balsam twig aphid and Christmas trees? Lots of buffer areas that could be planted around the tree fields.
Wow. Okay. I have not done work on that complex of insects, so I'd have to look that up. And actually, Tracy, that's a good one for you to look into on that. Yeah, if you have any problem with it, then get a hold of me. But that's not one I've worked on, so I don't have a good answer for you on that one, unfortunately.
All righty, I'll make sure I get this person's
email
information here. That was Rusty Barr.
Yeah.
And I didn't see. Oh, here we go. Do you need a banker plant for lacewings?
No, no. On the lacewing, they're inexpensive enough to purchase in, and they're one of the least expensive you're going to find out there. But there isn't any banker plant thing on that. Basically, when you let the larvae go, they're like Genghis Khan's troops going through an area. They're going to feed on things and they move on, and they don't hang around on things. So, yeah, no, there isn't a good banker system for that.
So those you would just continue to order and put out as time goes by.
And the way I'd use those, it's more of a cleanup thing. If you had a problem and it was getting out of control, then I'd go ahead with the lacewing. I wouldn't use that as your sole thing. For the case of the perennial grower I mentioned earlier, we were suggesting that because he needed that quick knockdown before he went out to the garden centers and went on to the customers. But yeah, no, I wouldn't do that long term. I would say with the other ones, with the parasitoids that lay things inside there, and maybe the Aphidoletes, Aphidomias, and then use this as if the population will get out of control, to use the lacewing. Yep.
Okay, any other last minute questions, folks? You can unmute yourself and ask questions through the microphone also if you have any other questions.
I think they're all off eating lunch.
So if not, then I'm just going to go ahead and put this up. This is the publication that Stanton was talking about, and I put this link in the chat box, so you can go ahead and open up that chat box and get that link if you'd like. And did want to mention that we have a virtual nursery conference coming up February 8th through 11th. I know some folks have nursery and greenhouse in the same operation. So I did want to mention that that is coming up. We've got a lot of really great folks signed up to present, and Danny Lauderdale, our area specialized agent for the East, is running this one. And I see some chats popping up here, so let me go back to chat, see if there's any. Nope, I don't see any other questions, just a lot of thank yous and great information.
All right. Well, I enjoyed spending the lunchtime with you. I'm going to go make my grilled cheese sandwich now and enjoy my lunch.
Enjoy your grilled cheese, and thank you very much, everybody, for being here. Hopefully we'll see the majority of you again tomorrow for our presentation from our plant pathologist, Inga Meadows. So have a wonderful day, everybody. Thank you.